the face everyone knew, the truth no one did. For decades, Dirk Bogarde stood beneath the brightest lights of British cinema, the embodiment of elegance, intelligence, and quiet authority. Audiences saw the perfect leading man and actor whose every glance felt deliberate, whose every word carried the weight of sophistication. He looked like someone who belonged to the spotlight, someone who wore fame as naturally as a tailored suit. But beneath that polished exterior was a life lived in careful silence, a story he protected more fiercely than any role he ever played. People adored him for the characters he portrayed, yet almost no one truly knew the man who returned home after the applause ended. Behind the charm, behind the flawless public image, there were walls built high enough to keep even those closest to him at a distance. And in the shadows of that carefully constructed persona lay questions that would follow him long after his final performance. Why did a man so admired choose to live so quietly? And what truth was he hiding behind the life everyone thought they understood? Dirk Bogarde began as a young actor with quiet ambition, but it did not take long for his presence to command attention. His early performances carried a magnetic restraint, an elegance that felt distinct in an era filled with loud personalities and flamboyant stars. By the 1,950 seconds, he had become Britain's undisputed leading man, the face that defined an entire generation of cinema. Whether portraying brooding heroes, conflicted intellectuals, or men balancing power with vulnerability, he brought a depth that audiences connected to instantly. The public admired the way he carried himself, graceful, articulate, and unmistakably refined. His films topped the box office, turning him into a national treasure and a symbol of the golden age of British filmmaking. Studio executives praised his professionalism, critics praised his intelligence, and fans praised the charisma he seemed unable to hide. At first glance, his rise looked effortless, almost predestined an artist born to inhabit the spotlight. Yet fame rarely tells the whole story. Behind the headlines celebrating his success, behind the posters that turned him into an icon, something far more complicated was slowly unfolding, something few would notice until it was too late. Dirk Bogarde did not arrive in the film industry with the confidence he later became known for. His early years were shaped by discipline, expectation, and a longing to belong somewhere beyond the boundaries of his upbringing. Acting was not simply a profession, it was an escape, a place where he could reshape himself into someone he felt the world might finally understand. His journey began on stage, where he discovered a rare ability to hold an audience without effort, using silence as effectively as other performers used grand gestures. That subtle command became his signature, carrying him from small theatrical roles into the world of cinema. As he stepped into film, his talent was undeniable, but his early career was marked by a constant need to prove himself. He faced rejections that shook his confidence, roles that nearly convinced him to walk away, and a system that demanded absolute perfection. What saved him was a single breakout performance that revealed the full extent of his depth, an industry awakening to a star it had almost overlooked. From that point forward, Hollywood and Britain alike recognized that Dirk Bogarde was not merely an actor. He was a force poised to redefine the leading man. As Dirk Bogarde rose higher, the demands placed upon him became heavier and more intrusive. Studios no longer saw him as a performer but as an investment, an image that had to be managed, reshaped, and protected at all costs. Every gesture, every interview, every public appearance was scrutinized. Executives insisted he present himself as the perfect embodiment of masculinity, a model of charm and composure that left no room for vulnerability or deviation. His personal instincts, his natural softness, even the way he expressed affection were gradually polished away to maintain the persona audiences expected to see. Fame cost him something far more precious than privacy. It cost him authenticity. His life grew more divided with each passing year, as he performed not only on film sets but in his own living room. While colleagues celebrated his brilliance, they rarely saw the exhaustion behind his eyes, the fatigue of maintaining a character he never auditioned for. Away from the cameras, he guarded his emotions with the same intensity he used to guard his reputation, knowing that any misstep could shatter the image the industry had built around him. At the center of that private life was a companionship that meant everything to him, yet could never be acknowledged publicly. Living in silence was not a choice, it was the price of his fame, a toll collected quietly day after day, until it became the only way he knew how to exist. As the years passed, The image that had once lifted Dirk Bogarde to greatness slowly became the weight pulling him down. Audiences wanted evolution, but the industry expected him to stay exactly as he had always been. Roles changed, tastes shifted, and the intensity of constant reinvention began to erode the foundation he had built his life upon. He moved toward more challenging characters, men fractured by circumstance, desire, or moral conflict, perhaps because they reflected pieces of himself he could never express publicly. These performances were some of the most powerful of his career, yet they came from a place of growing isolation. Privately, Bogarde wrestled with fears he could not share with anyone beyond the walls of his home. His journals revealed a man questioning the world around him, questioning himself, and questioning the life he had been forced to sustain for decades. Friends noticed moments of distance, long silences, and a heaviness he tried to hide behind polite smiles. Even as he continued to work, there was a sense that something within him was slowly dimming, like a stage light left burning after the audience had gone home. The companionship he relied upon most became his single source of stability, especially as illness and exhaustion entered the picture. For the public, he remained a legend. For those who knew him well, he was a man carrying invisible burdens that fame could never erase. And as the spotlight shifted away from him, the quiet he had once feared became the only thing left to accompany him. In his later years, Dirk Bogarde retreated from the world that had once celebrated him so fervently. He chose a quieter life, far from the noise of premieres and flashing lights, settling into a routine defined by writing, reflection, and the companionship that had anchored him for decades. His partner in that private world remained beside him through moments of frailty and uncertainty, offering a steadiness the public never knew he needed. As health challenges emerged, Bogarde faced them with the same dignity that marked his entire career, though they gradually narrowed his world to the rooms of his home and the pages of his notebooks. He continued to write letters, memoirs, fragments of thoughts trying to capture the truth of a life lived behind barriers. But among those writings was a final chapter, one he never allowed to see publication. Those who read it described it only as deeply personal, a piece of himself he withheld even from fame's hungry grasp. When he eventually left this world, he did so surrounded by the quiet he had spent a lifetime seeking yet never fully attaining. The public mourned a distinguished actor. Those closest to him mourned a man who had always carried more in silence than he could ever speak aloud. In the years following Dirk Bogarde's passing, his reputation transformed from that of a matinee idol into something far more complex and enduring. Audiences began to revisit his films not just for their artistry, but to search for the pieces of himself he had woven into each performance. His characters, often restrained, conflicted, quietly yearning, took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of his private struggles. Critics who once praised his elegance now recognized the emotional truths he had been able to convey without ever naming them aloud. Those who knew him personally remembered a man of remarkable loyalty, sharp wit, and deep sensitivity, qualities that rarely fit the public persona he had been asked to uphold. His writings, published posthumously, revealed a thinker of extraordinary depth, someone who observed the world with both tenderness and melancholy. Yet the most revealing fragment, the final chapter he chose not to release, remains locked away, a reminder that parts of his story were meant to stay untouched. Dirk Bogarde's legacy is not simply that of an actor, but of a man who lived between what the world demanded and what his heart longed for. His silence, once a shield, has become the space where admirers and historians search for understanding. And in that silence, he endures an icon shaped as much by what he revealed as by what he could never bring himself to say. Dirk Bogarde's story is a reminder that brilliance often comes wrapped in silence. He was admired for the control he carried on screen, yet that same control defined his private life in ways few ever imagined. His fame brought him admiration, respect, and a place in cinematic history. But it also placed him inside a role he never completely chose, a role he continued to perform long after the cameras stopped rolling. Behind his polished image was a lifetime of unspoken truths, carefully guarded relationships, and a search for authenticity in a world that demanded perfection. His journey invites us to question what lies behind the figures we idolize. How many stars have carried their greatest battles in quiet rooms? How many stories have been edited, softened, or erased to fit an image the world prefers to see? Dirk Bogarde left behind films, books, and a legacy of intelligence and subtlety, but he also left behind unanswered questions, fragments of a life lived between what he could show and what he had to hide. What do you remember most about him? And if he were still here, what would you want to ask? Thank you for watching and for keeping his story alive. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to support the journey of discovering the untold lives behind the faces we think we know. Fame and shadows, every star has its story.